Hello, and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. This is the second part of the State of InfoSec 2024. As I mentioned in the first part, today we're going to be bringing on Richard Cassidy, as well as Oliver is coming back to sit down and kind of look at where we think things are, some of the concerns that we have, some of the challenges we think we're going to be facing going forward. And it's a companion piece to that first part that we've already seen. So today, to talk about some of the interesting stuff that came out of the recent RSA Conference, and this has been fueled specifically from some of the stuff that Oliver has recently posted a little while back, just after he got back. And obviously, we've brought in Richard Cassidy and Oliver Rochford to talk about, it's the Byron Report, isn't it, Oliver?
Yeah, it is indeed. It is. It's.
So tell us about it. What is it?
Yeah, so there's this freelance journalist called Byron Acohido. He used to work for some of the big US news agencies, and he's got his newsletter. And so I met him at RSA. We were at one of the AI panels at a VC, listening to three of the actual founders talking about their product. And he came away writing a blog. He's got a blog called The Last Watchdog. It's pretty good. It's free information, which I think it's high quality information isn't actually that easy to get, especially in our industry. And he did a rundown, and his big takeaway was that rules-based security is out, contextual security is taking over. And so, of course, which begs the question, what's contextual security? Why is it taking over? Why do we need it? And why are we seeing a push for it now, right? That's essentially, why is now the right time for this? That's, in fact, the same way an investor would ask you. An investor would say, okay, you have a solution, but is this the right time? And he seems to think it is, but I think it's a good one. It's a good one to discuss because my own perception walking across RSA was indeed, there's AI being sprinkled in everywhere. Some people are more vocal about it than others. But what you're seeing is essentially a whole bunch of data science techniques coming together. Knowledge graphs, these kind of like graph-based display of different activities. You're starting to see, of course, LLMs working a little bit in the back end. It might not be obvious to people how they're being used, but they are starting to creep into basically being able to enrich and tag data. And of course, this isn't just some one area like security operations, maybe monitoring. No, it's everywhere. If you think of security, vulnerability prioritization, you need to have context. If you think of alert prioritization, you need to have context. If you think of threat modeling, you need to have context. It's almost a missing piece almost everywhere because it's not in isolation. We're not in an ivory tower. All of that around it matters too. Yeah. So I'll hand over to you guys now because that was me a long talk. But that's the driver behind the topic today. Yeah.
Okay, Richard, go for it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was one of the first comments I honed in on. It did make me chuckle a little bit. Rules-based security is over context-based security is taking over. I mean, I think they rely on each other. Context drives the rules, which drives the outcomes. So I think context, as Oliver rightly put it, is an enabler of kind of rules-based security. Because you have to have rules. You have to say, I don't want these things to happen, or I have a risk appetite for X, and if it exceeds Y, then I need to do something about it. So it was an interesting comment, and the companies that he mentioned, are I don't think they're doing massively different things, Oliver, unless I'm wrong, than what we've seen in the industry this past decade. Context-based analysis has been around for some time, but it is good at least to see somebody helping CISOs and decision makers kind of think more about that than trusting the vendors to deliver the outcomes they need. And interestingly, I was at InfoSec just for a day the other week, and I was there with somebody called Gorka Sadowski, who Oliver and I will both know from Exabeam days, and Oliver will know probably wider in the Gartner space. And we sat down and had a coffee, and he said, he just put his hand in his head and just a big sigh. I went, oh, what's up? Because it's just unbelievable that, every stand you go to, we are the best in application security. We are the best in UEBA. We're the best in this. And, I try to put the customer hat on when I go to these events and go, oh, my goodness, how does anybody make a decision in the midst of all of this complexity? And I wasn't at RSA, I should have probably gone, but I felt maybe it was a similar thing there. If I look at that report, the Byron report, it seemed to have very similar sort of messages for me. People talking about their products being the greatest in the industry, and actually, what I think we need is more of a platform play. It doesn't mean that I want the Palo Altos of this world or the Microsofts of this world to take over, right? Because it can't be a monopoly. But Checkpoint did it years ago with CrystalSec, and that kind of filtered away, or for some reason. And other companies are trying to do it, like the XDR Alliance, which Oliver knows about. Okay, we're moving in the right direction, but we're still too siloed. I think vendors are still far too siloed in what they do. But in the last 12 months, I've definitely seen a lot of good steps with the major players, right? So CrowdStrike, Microsoft, Palo Alto, etc., are definitely starting to build a narrative that's more about bringing in existing vendors and coming up with a consolidated story. And what that means is driving the outcomes from one platform, right? So it doesn't matter what's behind it; it's business outcomes based solution selling now, and that's good to see. But I think we need to push the button harder on that and move faster, because too many companies are the best at what they do in isolation. That doesn't help anybody, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and funnily enough, we were just discussing that. I was kind of a bit lost at InfoSec. I'll be honest, walking around when I was there, and I didn't go to RSA. It's a very expensive endeavor. Got to justify it to my financial officer, and she's a tough taskmaster. Maybe next year I'll go, but at the end of the day, from my experience at InfoSec, I agree with you. And I was a bit, as I was saying before, I was a bit lost. There's a lot of people saying they do a lot of things with a lot of solutions I've never even seen, never even heard of. You had the big boys there and all the rest of it, but I don't know where security is on the whole going at this moment in time. I suspect I know what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, but we're finding it so difficult. I mean, you're just looking at how fast these breaches are coming, and we were discussing it on the previous podcast to this, because this is a back-to-back one. The world is hotting up a little bit politically, well, quite significantly politically, and we're starting to see more and more attacks. And contextual-based security has always been one of my sort of more favorite aspects of any product. I've used some of those products, and getting context as to what's going on behind the scenes, rather than just getting the raw data, which doesn't really tell me anything. Or if I'm trying to find something, it takes me hours to hunt through various different logs or to hunt down really what's going on. And that's the more traditional way of kind of doing this. With things like scenes that give you context, they look at events and they will kind of put events together and then put a picture in front of you. It's so much more valuable. It means it cuts down the amount of time that I need to spend worrying about, trying to find specific logs, especially if the management are turning around saying, okay, well, all of this sounds really good, but it's all very high and technical. Can you give us some context as to what's going on? I don't know. It's a funny market. But then RSA is obviously over in the States, and they tend to be a little bit closer or a little bit further along than us. What happens over there tends to take a couple of months or maybe a year, depending upon what's going on. What were you seeing over in RSA, Oliver?
I had quite a positive experience at RSA. I thought there was a large, vibrant industry. There's a lot of experimentation going on. I mean, I agree with you, Richard, that synergies are important. Whether they have to come from a platform provider or whether it's just based on better standards, interoperability, I'm agnostic to that. But interoperability is the synergies, not working in the ivory tower in isolation. That's the whole contextual thing, right? You can't just look at a network log and make a decision. These attacks are far more sophisticated. They're stealthy. You have to look at a bigger picture. You have to understand what everyone is doing. And I think that's what people are aiming for. But the reason why there's so many small niche companies is because that's how you start out, right? It's basically, you're not going to be able to boil the ocean when you're a small startup. So it's confusing for the end user, because what they're seeing is just all of these very quite similar sounding, on the face of it, companies and they can't choose between them. But actually, there's a high level of specialization between them. Once you drill into it, I think like security operations, where I work primarily, you have 3 vendors who all sound the same, but then you realize one of them only does it for Splunk, one for Snowflake, one for Databricks, and one for ClickHouse. And immediately you realize, from a buyer perspective, I only need one of these probably. Like getting that information out there, I think, is harder. They're not doing a good job of providing that. But the interoperability, you're right. We need to have better interoperability, and I think we need large platform providers to drive that. They are they have data gravity. What Russ Halliuk says, data gravity, because you're basically aggregating a lot of your stuff into these solutions. And so if you hone in on that ecosystem, you can get these synergies. But with standalone, if you're a small provider and you want to deliver everything yourself now, that ain't going to happen. It's impossible, right? You can't do it.
Yeah. I want to talk about a little sideline story, and it does have a link back to the point. So let's talk about octopuses. And this is a presentation not by me. It's the current CISO of ABN AMRO, and it's a publicly available thing. You should definitely look at it. And I love this concept. So he starts out talking about an octopus, and he talks about the lifespan of an octopus and the fact that it lives for a very short period of time. It's a very highly specialized organism, and then in its dying phase, it completely deconstructs. It literally breaks down at a cellular level, and not like decomposition, but the DNA literally completely deconstructs. And he said that is the problem with cybersecurity today, is that we think in these short-term periods. We completely deconstruct what we're doing in 3 or 5 years maximum, and then we start again. We jump on the next treadmill and away we go. Now, some of that's down to the fact that there is a lot of innovation in industry, and with that level of innovation, you do kind of have to relook at things. But his call was for something called cyber senescence, and senescence being the term that sort of describes the process of growing old, right? In fact, in biology, senescence is a process by which cells age and permanently stop dividing, so they don't actually die. And so he said, what he feels is not working for us is we're not thinking long term enough. CISOs are still calling the 3 to 5 year life cycle. What if we thought 10, 15 years as a business? What if we designed a data cyber strategy around audit and compliance that went beyond the 5 year period? Would that fundamentally change how we hold our vendors' feet to the fire and what we want to do? And I was thinking, noodling on it for quite some time. I think he's got a point. I mean, technologically, it may be very difficult because the market's not set up, I think, for that. Although there are some vendors which are way older than 10 years and could potentially show that they had a life cycle that worked in that respect. But I do think if I were a CISO at a major organization, I would want to be thinking long term. Now, I don't know what the board's appetite would be for that. That's probably the biggest challenge. But I think technologically, I would want to sit with my vendors and say, this is my business and this is the journey we're going on. Okay, and we have a 5 year plan. In fact, we have a 10-year vision. And I need to know that you're going to be with me through these phases. And so I'm going to stress test you every year. I'm going to ask you, this is what's shifting. This is what's changing. How are you enabling me to meet the needs that I need to meet? I'm not just talking about cybersecurity. I'm talking about regulation, audit, all these things. I think it's a great concept. And I think it's something we should be thinking a lot bit more in industry, a much longer term view of what we're deploying and why we're deploying it.
So what you're describing is Germany, but secondly, so I'll tell you that. So there's 2 challenges I see with that approach. The first one is that you cannot plan longer than things change, and AI is a very good example. There's a paper out, situational awareness, by one of the OpenAI former OpenAI people, and he says by 2030 we're going to have basically self-improving AI. How can I have a 10-year plan? And the second challenge is that, what if your plans are different to all of my other customers' plans? What if everyone has a different plan? How can I meet all of these? What about my plans to grow as a business, as a vendor? Obviously, I can't attach my fate just to you as a customer. There has to be a mutual thing where we all have the same goalpost in a sense, rather than trying to find someone who's going to basically, because I'm not sure that's feasible, because nobody executes a 10-year plan in this day and age.
Yeah, they don't.
Does that make sense?
It does. I'm not saying there's answers to it. I just think it's an interesting concept that I do think has merit. I mean, you're right that there are technologically there are technological curves waves that come and go, and you're right. It's very rare to see ones that last that long. But I think we're in a phase now we could potentially think that longer term. And data is a good example of that. I mean, let's just talk about data growth as it exists, right? Reports state that, in the next 3 to 5 years, data growth will be about 5 or 7x where it was last year. So, so businesses at least should be saying, well, if that trajectory is going to continue, then what can I do to not have exponential data growth and support it in a way that makes sense to the business? So ask the right questions, make sure we're not doubling up on our data needs, and make sure that we're getting the right data we need to do what we're doing cybersecurity operationally. I think those sorts of things we can look at longer term, because that has a net effect on how we then secure it and control it and things like this. You're right. So there are pockets of things that we can't apply to, but I think there are some areas where we can, and maybe we should.
As a CISO, or having been a CISO myself a number of times for a number of different organizations, I always try to do a long-term plan. It's kind of hard to communicate that sometimes to the C-suite. They tend to think of things in the financial year perspective, maybe a few years, but never quite as far as 10, or I've very rarely ever come across that. Maybe a few sort of business owners who are actually still on the board as opposed to a bought-in CEO or something like that. And I think, in many respects, the principles for InfoSec have never really changed. They've been refined a lot. I'm not saying that 20 years ago we were much better or anywhere near where we are now. We weren't. We were still learning our trade. At a time when technology was rapidly advancing far faster than anybody really considered. And it doesn't mean a lot to the younger generation who are watching this, but believe you me, I remember a time when I didn't actually have a mobile phone, because they hadn't been around, or if they were this giant brick thing that you carried along, and they looked more like a car phone or a phone that you'd have at home. Yes, I am that old. And it amazes me to think that, the Mega Drive that I had when I was, 17, my phone now outstrips that little piece of technology that gave me so much pleasure all the way back in the day. So technology has changed quite extensively, and it continues to speed up. Moore's law is completely busted now. It's gone way beyond that. And with AI, whether you love it, whether you hate it, it's going to increase even faster, depending upon how it's used. The principles of InfoSec don't really change, but the application of it changes quite dramatically. Yes, let's look at, I try to look at some of the security through cultural shifts. So one of the biggest cultural shifts recently was lockdowns. Good example. Really simple thing. Mm-hmm. Before then, I used to do business continuity, and I used to do a bit of DR with some of my customers. And I'd always use, weirdly enough, a pandemic as one of the higher end issues. What happens if? Let's just spitball it, workshop it. And they'd always used to say, no, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. Boom, then it does. And then we go from people being in an office to not being in an office, all working from home, literally overnight. And then once the lockdown stopped, nobody wants to go back to the office. There's a big old, no, we're not going out. The whole economy starts to fall apart, but due to the fact that all the commercial industries have now fallen apart. So all the food and eateries that were around those businesses over in New York, good example, have all been dying in droves, recently, because there are less people that are in New York. And if you've ever been in New York, I've never seen so many bloody homeless people there at this moment in time. The changes and shifts that we need to do within InfoSec need to be a reflection of the times, and we were discussing just before. Malicious actors are getting a hell of a lot more aggressive. So we do need to look at things like contextual security to try and figure out what the bloody hell's going on in an environment. But we still don't have the budgets for it. And there's still a lot of confused CISOs looking at the technological stack that they've got available to them and saying, right, I've got all these little jigsaw pieces. I can't afford all of them. How the bloody hell am I going to deal with this? Oh, and by the way, your GRC tool has just gone up by 150%. On your renewal. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I I guess I'm just a bit lost, guys. Come on, give me some insight.
It is interesting. So there's reports well known, right? There was a report by the 10guards.com article that cybercrime will cost the global economy about 10.5 trillion by 2025, right? So it'll be, if you keep that figure in your mind, it's the third largest economy, right behind the two big economies that I won't mention. And so, I was at an event, it was probably about a month ago, it was a government event in London, and it was all about supply chain attack management. And this is what it drove me nuts, because I went on stage and just showed this slide and went, okay, right, if you really believe some of the conversations we've just had are still going to put you ahead of the game, I think you're greatly mistaken. And there were other messages around that. But one of the key messages from one of the vendors was that we'll do assessments of your third-party supply chains. We'll do it every 6 months, and we'll give you a report every 6 months. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You think the adversaries run in 6-month cycles? I mean, if that's your window of understanding of your threat surface or what the risks are that could potentially lead to supply chain breaches, you're way behind the curve. And that goes back to some of the things at RSA, right? It's all about context now. And then some other interesting facts as well is, cyber attacks are more, and this is according to an insurance company, a European insurance company, cyber attacks are more likely than physical theft or fire to businesses. And so to your point on budget, I think there's a huge mismatch on what's being spent in this area versus what we're up against. And if you think about the third largest economy by 2025, and I'm not saying, that's one big group of adversaries. It isn't. It's spread across everything. But, even the groups themselves are getting more enabled. If you look at all of the blog posts or you do look at the dark websites where they normally talk to each other, there's a lot of recruitment going on at the moment. And these ransomware as a service scripts, these malware service scripts, they're getting bigger. They're getting more enabled. And it's all with one goal in mind, right? And if they're not hacktivists, of course, the goal is to make money. And so, yes, we really are at a difficult crossroads with, again, how much do you spend and where do you apply it? I mean, I know the answer to that question, but I think a lot of businesses don't, because they don't ask the right questions. But I'll stop there and let Oliver chime in on his thoughts.
Just before you do, one thing that I just wanted to pick out that I found important there is the fact that you are right. The application of security is changing. It's not reactive anymore. It's proactive. And even things like pen testing, you mentioned before, having a security check of your third party is great every 6 months, but it's no reflection of how secure they actually bloody well are. Yeah. Same with the pen test. You can have your yearly pen test, and that's cool. Okay, in May, you know what your situation is. But by July, it's all old news, and you're screwed. So that's why people are moving to more this continuous pen testing kind of idea. They're looking at more kind of ongoing management of their supply chain through similar kinds of solutions, just to understand the cyber risk that they're up against. I mean, look at what's going on with Snowflake at the moment and some of the other stuff that's happening in the industry. All of this is supply chain stuff to organizations who are getting the brunt of the issue. And we haven't fixed it. But I'll go over to Oliver because I talk too much. Go, Oliver. Sorry.
No, so it's interesting because like the slowing down, for example, or having long-term planning. If you ask me, I think that horse is bolted. That chance was 15, 20 years ago to bake security and not bolt it on when there was only a few countries dominating it. What's holding us back from that now is that we'd have to do it globally. If everyone, because we're basically in a Mexican standoff, if you pull back and the other side doesn't, that's the situation where people believe we're in, right? At the same time, most companies right now, what they're dealing with is volatility, uncertainty. The problem is they don't know if what they're investing in now is going to be viable in 5 years' time. AI is a very good example because there's going to be a lot of dead ends. Obviously, if you look at the amount of companies, most of those aren't going to survive. If you buy into the wrong company, that's a multi-year transformation project right there, which is going to scupper your plans. I think that's hard to make long-term decisions when the whole market in the industry in the world is basically changing at a very, slow phase. I agree with you. I wish we could slow it down because that's the problem, because we're still trying to externalize securing this 100% onto the end user. And that cost has to be distributed across the supply chain. Still ongoing. And we haven't done that at all. Look at AI, right? Why are they developing AI brand new and I have to buy an AI WAP? Come on, have we learned nothing out of the past 20, 25 years? And it's that rush to market and being quicker than the others that's pushing that. That's psychological, that's not technological, and you can't fix that with technology at all, right? That's the wrong way to fix it. Yeah, but the context and the timing comes in with that. And the last thing I wanted to say was that you mentioned the 6 months. Well, that's the problem with context in the past. When I worked in a SOC, I needed to call somebody to say that asset that I just saw exfiltrating data, is that a legitimate transfer? And that had a delay in the response. I'm not sure the technology is going to fix it because the problem is centralizing the data. It's all very well saying an LLM is going to read my documentation if I have documentation, right? So there are other things we need to fix in parallel. It's a data problem as well to a certain extent. But I think primarily it's hard for us to deal with this when it keeps changing on a rapid basis, quicker than we're able to adapt maybe. That's part of the problem. Technology takes time to transform and deploy, but actually the changes are right now possibly occurring quicker than some companies are able to execute that,
You're absolutely right. I mean, the tool that you buy today may be completely redundant next year. And if you've kind of tried to save some money by doing the 3-year deal thing or the 5-year deal thing, you end up with a tool that you're paying for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever that you don't bloody use anymore, that just sits there and mothballs.
Or platform. The last wave of platformization. Yeah, the last phase, 2014, 2015, as you mentioned earlier, RSA, EMC, Symantec, McAfee, IBM, HP and Co. People moved there because it was a pricing strategy. Because you've got a bundling price. And indeed, if you look at CrowdStrike, their last quarterly statement, $300 million on logs, not because Humio is a great SIM, it's because they bundled it with the XDR, right? And that is a motivator. The problem is you get this best of breed tool that gets acquired and 2-3 years down the line, it's not best of breed, especially not across the whole portfolio. Some, maybe not all. You know what Cory Doctorow calls entshitification, where basically the quality of the product declines over time because they're trying to extract more and more profit out of it. And that is also a reality that a CISO has to deal with. I think all of these things make long-term planning really hard, but I think that's why we yearn for it. We yearn for more stability to be able to plan because it's actually the big stress factor.
I like to use GRC tools as an example of that. You buy your GRC tool, you use it for a year, 2 years, you come very reliant on it, you've plugged all your data into it, and funnily enough, there's very few ways to pull that data out because obviously the vendor really doesn't want you to do that. They really don't want you to be able to migrate it to a companion tool. And I've said before, I've known vendors who they wait a year or two in the GRC space. They wait till you're nice and reliant on this tool. It's like being a heroin addict. Now I've said heroin, of course, YouTube are going to hate this. But, once you get them hooked on it, they can't get off it. And you have to start paying more and more price, to your dealer, which is the vendor in this case, to be able to do the same thing and to continue with the unless you want to go through the pain of completely pulling yourself out of it and then bringing things on board. It's tough to plan for this, but you've got to be aware of it. And a lot of CISOs, especially the younger CISOs who aren't experienced because there's been an explosion of the need for CISOs, get burned really quickly by this.
But I was going to turn this around to Richard, because I think Richard's absolutely correct in as much as that a large provider should have a team of people doing this crystal ball gazing, and they should help you provide some of that stability and consistency, right? That's essentially what you're looking for in a vendor. But of course, it requires a partnership. And you say that the industry doesn't do this well. We do it. We have companies like Broadcom, like OpenText, who acquire mature incumbents, and they will give you that 10, 15, 20 years you're looking for. But it comes at the cost of innovation. And I guess that's a bit that's broken. How do you sustain it while still remaining innovative?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'll come to it in a minute because I think the consultancy houses have a lot to answer here. But so just park that for a second. Yeah. So look, so SaaS was the
That's
answer.
All right.
Wasn't?
I'll sit quietly in the background here.
Well, because I've sat with a lot of them this past year, and Anyway, we'll come to it in a second. So SaaS was the answer, or it supposedly was. Everything is a service, consumption economics. You just lock in for 12 months, and if we don't deliver, you can pull out when you like. And to your point, James, getting out wasn't as easy as they thought it was. And I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift in the industry in that, there are vendors, Snowflake, Devo, et cetera, that are allowing you to centralize your data somewhere else. And then they don't care what you do with the data. They give you API and good sort of access to it from other vendors' tool sets, which is great. And we need to build on that in all the security tool sets as well. We need to have, industry agree to standardize a lot of the output so that if I do shift from Palo Alto to Fortinet or wherever it is, that there's a language that we can use that's understandable and that it's there, right? I'm not saying that stuff isn't there. It's just not utilized enough. And there's an awful lot of proprietary still baked into a lot of the SaaS solutions, which makes it painful. So, customers should be pushing harder on these points, saying, look, I need to know what the exit looks like. Because you get into it, it's almost like the honeymoon period. Oh, yeah, we've made the decision to go with vendor A and we love you and it's always going to be perfect, right? And then the divorce comes and the pain hits. No, prepare for the divorce. Ask your vendors, what does the exit look like if we want to move away from you? If you fail to deliver, how do we get our data? What does that process look like? And if that's painful, guys, then maybe that's not the right relationship to enter into. In all honesty,
what does a vendor prenup look like?
But we used to do this when cloud first became a thing. First virtualization and cloud started to become a big thing. Funnily enough, it was one of the questions I used to ask a lot when people were moving over to the new, to back then to the cloud vendors. Because like now, there was a billion different cloud vendors with a billion. Anybody with any IT skills was creating a company that did cloud, and my God, there was a lot of them. And one of the questions I was used to ask when my customers were looking to onboard them is, how do we get the data out? How much is it going to cost us to get the data out? And we've forgotten that little question. We don't ask it anymore. We're so used to SaaS. You're right, Richard. What does the divorce look like? We should be asking that question again. And who are your suppliers as well? Because let's look at Pure. They're not particularly happy with Snowflake right about now, are they?
No, exactly. Yeah, but the vendors do a great job, and Oliver and I have been at enough, and Oliver's interviewed more than I have in his time. Where they're very good at saying, if you buy us, we'll show you how easy it is to migrate from the competitor to us. But there's never the reverse story. And when you ask the question, it's really hard. But I just want to touch on supply chain for a minute as well, because I don't want the vendors getting off the hook on this. My God, so I don't want to beat up Microsoft, but come on, again, right? Microsoft zero-day attack, zero-click Outlook, remote code execution exploit. And this is a very recent one. And what's really annoying me here, it's driving me nuts, is on this particular one, they're saying, well, we're not going to release everything. This is the research group that found it because we want to present this at DEF CON. But it's a 0 day, and it's right now you can be hit by this, and arbitrary code can be executed, and yada yada yada. Like, come on, industry, are you absolutely kidding me? We're going to wait till August until we tell organizations how to prevent against this attack. And I want to make a wider statement on this, which is Microsoft, Adobe, all of the major vendors. When a breach occurs in your code, that is as a result of you just not doing the basics well. And I'm not holding their feet to the fire on these true 0 days, and we can even argue what does that mean, that potentially they couldn't have found in breach attack simulation and secure coding practices. But they've got to have some liability. And the US government at least is starting to have these conversations about, vendors now need to be held more responsible fiscally for the damages that may well be caused in the supply chain. And there's much of a part of it as the service providers that deliver the services. Industry, and I really want customers to start asking their vendors, what's your liability if this goes wrong and it's something that you could have fixed? Because it's just... Yeah. It drives me nuts that these vendors can go, oh, yeah, sorry, I made another mistake. Sorry that your business has just lost 10 million in ransom payment. Sorry that you were operationally inefficient for a week. That is not acceptable anymore. We've got to change this.
It's worse than that. It's the vendor says to the end user, you have to secure our software. And the end user says, well, why don't you do that? And the vendor says, that's way too expensive.
That's exactly it, Oliver.
What?
Yeah.
Like
know what?
crazy.
If you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast and are thinking, what should I do? What should I get into in the InfoSec space? I think there's going to be a really, really, really lucrative sort of like legal kind of side of things when all of these kind of lawsuits start flying around. Because let's face it, if some of these supply chain issues that you see, I don't think I've seen who's sued who afterwards, but you could bet your bottom dollar that it's there. And it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. If your cloud storage supplier, for instance, for your awesome SIEM solution, has a breach and all your data is nicked from all of your customers, you're not going to sit there and take that on the nose, are you? You're going to be unleashing the lawyers. See you later, So there you go. I might become a cyber lawyer along with my AI companion, who tells me the law.
Yeah. because the argument for a long time has been that software is exceptional, and the truth is that you can't prevent 100% of vulnerabilities, but we can prevent far more than we do. And indeed, if you think of the law of diminishing returns, there's a certain percentage where that's cost effective to do on the developer side. Beyond that, returns diminish. And then there's a certain percentage that's sufficient to do on the end user side. And right now, we have an imbalance there. We're expecting to do too much on the end user side. That last 20% costs more than the first 80 to fix, to mitigate.
And it's people not facilitating due diligence throughout that supply chain either. I mean, all it takes is, one supplier for, they provide a solution and they haven't looked after their code. They haven't done DevSecOps. They haven't done anything. And all of a sudden, 12 companies who are, utilizing a product that my camera's just died, utilize the product and get affected by this. So who's at fault?
But how are we financing this? I mean, so I wrote a paper a few years back with Dr. Stefan Frey from EHT Zurich, and it was actually cited by the OECD. And we calculated how much a global bug bounty program would cost. And it was something only like 0.04% of GDP. And that's to cover basically open source, that kind of stuff. Because right now, it's unevenly distributed. But most of all, companies aren't exactly paying a tax to pay for security. That doesn't exist. There isn't a separate tax for that or a separate anything for that. It's just basically between the end user and the vendors. And you can imagine both sides are a bit reluctant to want to pay her.
We're trying so desperately to secure our own organization and to try to understand how all the piecemeal pieces that make up all the critical solutions come into play and what they're doing. There's so many organizations who are doing the barest minimum. I used to lose my mind when I would go in to do PCI DSS compliance to an organization who I know are a big e-tailer. I know that they're a massive amount of money that they earn. And they say, you know what, we want to do the minimum required to meet the compliance. And I would have conversations with these organizations, say, okay, the minimum is the standard, and the standard tells you this. So it's useless for you to turn around and say you want to do the minimum required, the cheapest way of reaching the level of security required to secure your environment. But are you thinking about your customers here? Are you thinking about what this would actually look like? If you do the barest minimum, you are still likely at some point to have a security event. By adding a little bit more on top, a bit more effort, a bit more of monitoring, a bit more above and beyond what your compliance says, you're actually probably not only protecting your customers, but you're protecting yourself, because you are the ones who are going to look like bloody idiots if you have a breach and say you're facilitating all the major supermarkets' tills, or refrigeration units, and somebody uses your network to hop onto the localized networks of those big supermarkets, and then you compromise the tills, because that's what's happened in the past. It's frightening. It's scary stuff. And we've moved way off the contextual security thing, but let's put some context into why you need to secure yourself in the first place. It's because no one else is going to. What are you going to do? Plead with the malicious people who've just ransomwared you to please give us back our data and don't release it? They're not going to say no. They're going to tell you to F off and then charge you 30 million quid.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, and on that market, that's shifting too, right?
It's getting more expensive, isn't it?
Well, not only that, but hackers are turning to just exfiltrating the data now. There's been a massive increase in just exfil, and even just small amounts of data exfiltrated is still a bad day for an organization, isn't it? So, but to your point, I love the point that you made there. Is if you think about protecting the customers, the consumers of your service, then you should be able to work out the blueprint of what bad looks like for you, what your worst day could potentially be. Because I think it's maybe obviously differently, but every CISO I've spoken to in the last 3 months alone, okay, I hear the same old thing. It's about our environment, it's about our data, it's about our business. And I have asked the question, okay, what about your customers? And I'm not going to flog Synovis too hard. The whole issue with NHS and Bloods not being able to be available because their systems are down because of an attack. But I'd imagine if there was just a look there at who are we servicing here and what are the critical components of that service, then they may well have had a better system in place to kind of prevent what has happened. And I'm not saying they would or wouldn't. I'm just saying there's a high likelihood that they would. And even if you look at, Snowflake, again, a good example, they allowed, customers weren't forced to have multi-factor authentication on. And that's been partly, attributed to what's gone on here. Come on, these aren't new problems, guys. We have to get better at working out what our risks are to our consumers, our customers, and then help them to mitigate that risk. Because the risk may not always be on the business, by the way. It may be on what the customers are doing. In Snowflake's case, you weren't turning on standard security functionality you should have. And work it both ways, because I don't think it's all on the business. I also think it's on the user of the data as well, and not so easy to resolve. But there you go.
There is also an element, I think, with that particular vendor that you mentioned, where there was a business decision they don't want to enforce it because it would annoy customers. Don't forget, security is annoying to some people. When you've got to sit there and wait for your phone to ping so you can press the yes, it's me, or business owners don't necessarily want the customer journey to be affected by security. They want security to be nice and invisible. But I bet you bottom dollar there's a hell of a lot of bloody SaaS and various other vendors at the moment that are going in and clicking on the must-have MFA.
Because criminals prey on the greedy and the impatient. That's just the way it is, right?
Is brilliant. That is brilliant.
But
I like that.
It is true that, but it is true, but because it is a friction point for people, right? And it adds up. But what's interesting about what you said, Richard, is that so. Ashley Madison, there's a great Netflix documentary in the moment about the breach behind Ashley Madison several years back. And people don't realize that they invested zero in security. It was a known secret within the company that they had zero security, and people suffered from that. There were divorces, suicides, and everything. Nothing happened. And I've thought about this. Why SolarWinds slammed, and then you have, basically Ashley Madison. The difference is that one was a private company, the other one was public.
And one was servicing government, and one was serving government officials by all accounts.
One lied to their investors, the other just lied to their customers.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference between whether you're going to get prosecuted in the moment or not, who you are basically working with. And when you're right, so that worst day, what's the worst day for our customers should be the question, not our worst day. What's our worst day in relation to our customers? What would our customers think is our worst day? That's probably a good scenario. But with Ashley Madison, it costs them nothing. The reality is that the company is still going strong, It
is, but one of the to be honest, you've just described one of the first things that I do when I go in and be a CISO for any organization, virtual CISO, or when I have been, it's like, okay, we can analyze and do the business impact assessments with all the departments internally, but what I'm actually really interested in is talking to the person at the top, the CEO, whatever, and say, what keeps you up at night with regards to security events that affect the business, that affect your bottom line and affect, your relationship with your partners, with your customers, with the people who rely on you. They seem surprised at that question when I ask it. It's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, if you're a financial institution and all your financial records suddenly get stolen, exfiltrated out, and then shoved out onto the internet? What are you going to do? What are your thoughts on that? Oh, I don't like that idea. Okay, well, let's do something about security again. It goes back to Jack Jones. When I interviewed Jack Jones, an amazing man. There's a lot of hero worship there for me, but his model on FAIR is so good at showing what the effects of risks can be. And we need to remind ourselves as InfoSec professionals that we are risk-based. We look at the risks, we look at the outcomes, we look at the possible incidents, the most probable, the worst-case scenario, and we make decisions based off of that. But we also have to inform the C-suite as to what their decision-making of not putting money into security and taking the easy route so we don't piss off customers or piss off partners would feasibly be. They don't like that communication, but they've got to understand it. They've got to know it. It's their business ultimately.
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer. I mean, I always say when I meet a CISO, and you've heard this so many times, right? What are you protecting? Where does it sit? But the most important question is the third one for me. Although I'm going to add what's your customer's worst day to that, so it'll be 4 questions in future. Is who are you protecting, or what are you protecting your data from? And so what I'm advising CISOs to do at the moment is understand that attack surface, understand through all of the data that we have about what APT or UNC groups are out there that target you and the way they target you, then analyze the technology and services and systems you have in place, and then identify the gaps and go back to the board and say, we've gaps here. It's a realistic gap because they're doing this stuff at the moment. We haven't got coverage. Your move. And that's not always the best way to talk to boards. It's a very passive-aggressive way. But
I like to give them 3 options personally, because normally they'll pick one of them. I've seen what happens when CISOs go into a board actually and say, I found all of these problems, you need to fix them. They're like, oh, great. Thank you very much for that horrible information. You can leave now.
Yeah, and I agree with you, James. Your move is, right, there are 3 outcomes. We do nothing, we do this, or we do this. And I always say, choose the one you want. Tell them you want this, but they've got 3 options. And then hopefully with all of, think about regulation, man. The C-suite are now liable for custodial sentences. If I was a CISO, I'd want to make sure I've got a full paper trail of I identified it and show them how to mitigate. And the board said no. So they go to prison, not me.
That's why in every risk management solution or implementation you put in, there's a nice little section in there called, risk owner, along with what their decision making was. And you're absolutely right. The old adage of arse covering in this space hasn't changed in all the years that I've been here, because when the shit hits the fan, there will be finger pointing. And if you haven't done something because you didn't do it, because you didn't perceive it, okay, fair enough. But if somebody made a decision that was a bad decision, you can bet your bottom dollar they don't want to be the ones fingered in that particular situation, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
But hey, right, so my camera has failed. Time is drawing thin, and I know Richard and Oliver are very, very busy people, and we've been podcasting all morning. I think there's been some really good info in there, and I think it's definitely good for people out there to really kind of sit down and rethink what they're doing, their defense in depth, where they're going from a security standpoint. Rule-based security is good, but you need contextual security as well. You need to adapt from a reactive security and have a good measure of proactive security as well. The world is changing, whether you want it to or not, and we have to change with it. But my God, the purview of InfoSec is increasing by the day. All right, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll speak to you all again soon, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And thank you for listening or even watching the latest edition of Razorwire. It's always good to get feedback. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us via LinkedIn or through our website, www.razorthorn.com. If you feel that there's something that we should cover maybe a little bit more in depth, a new topic or something of interest to you or the community at large. We'll even do interviews. If you've got any recommendations or you want us to interview people, we'll reach out to those individuals and see if we can get them on camera so we can ask them the important questions about InfoSec. So it'd be great to see what your feedback is. In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of lots of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.